Thank you so much for having us here today.
That's Kate, and this is Sarah.
I'm Kate Cannelstein. As Betty mentioned, I'm a lead organizer with the Vermont Workers Center, and so honored to be here. And I have to say, this is an amazing potluck. I feel really good right now. Sarah and I have been having a little bit of a whirlwind since we got here. We actually had a humongous event just on Saturday back in Vermont, and then we got right on a plane afterwards and flew out here, and we have been doing interviews and meeting people all day since then, and we are just so excited to be here. Already, even in less than 24 hours of being in Oregon, my first time ever being in this state, you can feel the momentum and the energy of people that are ready to stand up and change this broken healthcare system. And that has been so inspiring to us, because when we started the healthcare campaign in Vermont, we knew from the very beginning that we were, well, first of all, that we were going to win no matter what it took. And second of all, that, thanks, Sarah. Second of all, that it had to be a victory, not just for Vermont, but a victory for everyone everywhere. And part of that means sharing the lessons that we learned through the course of our campaign with as many people as possible, and also making it possible for other states to follow our lead and help lead for healthcare, for universal healthcare for the entire country. We knew that ultimately what this country really needs is a national universal healthcare system, but it became really clear that that wasn't going to happen at this time on the federal level. We started our campaign even before Obama was nominated for presidency, but even then we knew that we couldn't expect something to happen on the federal level at this time. And so we really believe that it needs to be states leading the way and setting examples, and that one by one we start building that momentum that can set the stage for the rest of the country. So we're really excited to be here. We hope that Oregon is next, and we are here to serve you tonight.
So since she's Kate, I'm Sarah, and I'm also an organizer with the Vermont Workers Center. We're a member-run democratic organization, and we fight for lots of different issues. Besides healthcare, we envision a Vermont where everybody can meet all of their basic needs, where everybody has a livable wage job, has the kind of housing they need, has the access to the healthcare they need, childcare, education, and all of our human rights. And we believe that the best way that we can live in that kind of world is by people coming together to put direct pressure on the people who are making the decisions that affect those things. So that's our strategic orientation. And a little bit of background about us. And 3 years ago, we started the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign because we realized that that one of the biggest issues affecting working people in Vermont was access to healthcare, and that it touched all of these other things that we care about. It touched jobs, and our brothers and sisters in unions were spending their entire contract negotiations worrying about working on healthcare instead of all the other things that they wanted to negotiate on. And we have a workers' rights hotline that basically turned into a healthcare hotline. It obviously impacts people's ability to afford housing and all different issues of economic justice.
We made great strides in 2010. First, we descended on the State House with thousands of petitions and with our own answer to professional lobbyists, the People's Team. The team reported back to Vermonters on what's going on in the State House and helped us hold our legislators accountable. In communities across the state, our local organizing committees mobilized their families and neighbors, held public events, and educated our elected officials on the need to provide health care as a public good to all Vermonters. As a result of this organizing, legislators began to debate real health care reform. A bill that later became Act 128 committed Vermont to treating healthcare as a public good. It included all of the principles put forward by the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign: universality, equity, accountability, transparency, and participation.
So what happened, we had that big healthcare rally and we passed the bill, which has now become Act 48, Vermont's Universal Healthcare Bill, the first law in the country that actually commits Vermont to a universal healthcare system based on human rights principles. So we had a major victory, and we just wanted to tell you a little bit about what that actually means.
Okay, so just a little bit about, we wanted to pull out some of the ways that this new universal health care law actually represents some of our human rights principles. So I'm just actually going to read some language from the bill because it's very strong, as you can see. So it says that the state will create Green Mountain Care to provide as a public good, comprehensive, affordable, high quality, publicly financed healthcare coverage for all Vermont residents in a seamless and equitable manner, regardless of income, assets, health status, or availability of health coverage. So that's pretty strong. That gets us to a healthcare system that's a public good, that is universal, and that is equitable. It also says that we will achieve healthcare reform through the coordinated efforts of an independent board, state government, and the citizens of Vermont, with input from healthcare professionals, businesses, and members of the public. So this means that actually this process, it's not just that we are going to have a universal healthcare system, but that the process of getting there is going to be with input from us. We, the people of Vermont, are going to be helping make those decisions all along the way, and that's really important to us.
Some of the ways that this healthcare bill meets our principles, and as we were going through the legislature, we had to battle along the way for making amendments and strengthening the legislation. And here are some of the things that we've won. Universality, one of the principles you saw in the films. All will be eligible regardless of immigration status. That was a battle. This was a divide and conquer tactic that came in, and we can talk a little bit about that victory later, but universal equals everyone. Equity. Financing plan is to be consistent with the principle of equity. People pay according to their ability to pay, and everyone has access to care. Accountability and transparency. Human rights principles as a basis for governance and implementation. This means that our healthcare system is accountable to us, that we get a say, and that it has to be transparent. And participation, as Sarah was saying, the process for public input into decision making. And as we speak right now, back in Vermont, our members are mobilizing and getting ready to participate in listening sessions that the Green Mountain Care, this independent board has set up to have us participate in the process of actually setting up our healthcare system, and that's because of these demands that we want. And so that's actually happening right now. And that it's a public good. The healthcare is to be provided as a public good, not a commodity to be sold in the marketplace for profit, but it's something that as a society we have for everyone, and it's ours.
Yeah. So this is a huge victory. This is a lot that we got in this bill, yeah. This has been a hard-won fight with thousands of Vermonters across the state participating and acting together collectively for the change that they know that they need for their communities.
One of the things that we promised tonight was that we were going to share some of the lessons that we learned from the campaign. And this is important for you, but actually this is a great exercise for Sarah and I because, as we indicated, this battle is not over and we have a lot of work ahead of us. And we're going to need all of everyone's support in making sure that that we follow through on this victory. And so us reiterating these lessons will be helpful for us, and it will hopefully be helpful for you too. And these lessons are hard won by hundreds and hundreds of people who are leaders on this campaign and members of our organization throughout the state of Vermont.
And actually we came up with boiled these 5 lessons down by reflecting with our local organizing committees all over the state. So we didn't write these. These are written by our whole organization. It's, I think, really important.
So the first lesson is that people's movements can redefine political priorities. This we learned really fast. And the first thing that happened when we decided to take on the healthcare as a human right campaign was that anybody who was anybody told us that it was impossible and that it wasn't going to happen. And we were told that again and again and again. And what that meant to us was that we weren't well enough organized, that our legislators, the people who had their ears, were the people who are profiting off of the current healthcare system and the people who had a real stake in not wanting to see it change. And so we needed to build the grassroots power to change that. that. And we went from having the president pro tem of the Senate the first year we started the campaign not even sit down and talk to us about this and tell us he's a practical guy and he doesn't think this is a good idea, to the fast forward 1 year later, running for governor on a campaign for single payer health care. What helped was having a people's movement, because before we had a people's movement, he wasn't doing anything. And then once we got organized and started building that pressure and had that big May 1st rally, he shifted his whole message and actually ran a campaign based on it and was going around in his speech. He would say healthcare is a human right, which a year before he was saying, I don't think this is practical. So people's movements can redefine political priorities.
A lot of people, you might be thinking, they're not called Vermont Workers Center Single Payer Campaign. We're called the Healthcare is a Human Right Campaign. And we use a human rights framework for our organizing, and that's really, really important. And we've learned that it's important both for the organizing work and for our policy fights. So you saw that our human rights principles, those 5 principles, that those were all in our legislation. And it's really important for the policy because instead of us having to take a bill and negotiate it down to its weakest version so that we can get it through the legislature, we're able to always bring any piece of legislation that our elected leaders are talking about and hold it up to our principles and our standards and say, this is what we're fighting for and this is what we elected you to do. And so we're not negotiating with you on the closest we can get to something being equitable. We're going to keep organizing and we're going to keep mobilizing until it meets what we believe equitable means. And that means a lot. It also means that we don't just have this campaign for one single bill, right? When we use a human rights framework, we know that means that we can fight for the bill for universal health care this year. We can fight again next year when we have bills that relate to all different pieces of this healthcare system, that the campaign is encompassing of the entire human right to health. And that means that we can also, just a quick story, I'm probably taking too long on this already, but we just won another small victory in Vermont where our dialysis units all around the state, huge victory, not a small victory, huge victory, were being sold to Fresenius, a for-profit company that has horrible staffing ratios and runs dialysis units on some of the most vulnerable members of our communities for a profit. And because we have this Healthcare is a Human Right campaign, that didn't just encompass the one bill for a universal healthcare system. We were able to move our campaign to fight on that as well, and actually say to the Banking and Insurance and Securities Administration that actually this goes against the direction that our state has already decided to go in, and we cannot sell off Fresenius, and they blocked the sale in Vermont. So this is why the human rights framework is important for policy, but it's also really important for our organizing, right? So when we go out and talk to people in our communities, which is what we all have to do all the time if we're going to build a movement, when we talk to people and they tell us their heart-wrenching stories of what is going on for them and how this healthcare crisis looks for them, when we say, well, we have a campaign for healthcare as a human right, that resonates. That is something that people understand because their rights are being violated. And they understand what it feels like to not have their human right to healthcare recognized. And so when we go out and we organize in our communities, people understand immediately what we're talking about when we say healthcare is a human right. And I bet everybody here might have had an experience of talking about the policy details of different proposals for healthcare and having people go, what? And it's really amazing for our organizing that our campaign reflects almost everybody's issue. When you're organizing around healthcare as a human right, all types of stories fit into the problem of our human rights are being violated. So that's another lesson that we learned, is that a lot of people told us at the beginning that healthcare as a human right doesn't mean anything, it's not really going to work, it's not going to resonate with people, and what we found is it's the exact opposite. It's been incredibly effective. So another lesson that we learned is that we need to really be prepared for divide and rule tactics. So what we mean by that is we need everybody. What we've got is each other when we're building a movement for universal health care. And the way that our opposition is going to try to win these struggles or stop us from winning these struggles is by dividing us along the lines of hot button issues, right? So we've seen this happen a million times before, and we realized that. So we decided that we weren't going to let that happen. We were going to get in front of those issues. So does anybody have any ideas of what some of the dividing issues might be real quick? If you want to throw anything out? What's that? Immigration. Great example.
Abortion.
Yes. Okay. So these are abortion, immigration. I'll use the example of immigration because this was one of the issues that we knew was going to come up in Vermont and everywhere. When we started the campaign, as we were organizing in communities across the state, one of the very first things that we did is we did anti-racism trainings with all of our members all around the state, and we explicitly talked about what does this mean in our healthcare campaign. We talked about how racism keeps us divided, and then we talked about how are they going to use that when we try to come together to fight for universal health care? And we actually had conversations with people about why that was just a tactic to keep us from actually achieving the healthcare system that we wanted to live in. So when the time came, and of course we knew that it would, and we know it's going to come up again, for actually a Republican and a Democrat, they co-sponsored an amendment to our universal health care bill that would exclude undocumented people from our new healthcare system. People were so ready, and they were like offended that our legislators actually thought that we were not strong enough to be united on fighting that amendment. And people mobilized in full force. They called, they wrote, they met with their legislators. They would not leave the State House until that amendment came out. And in like a 48-hour period where we basically heard there's no way it's coming out until just 2 days later, they actually struck the amendment and added in a replacement amendment to look into how federal immigration policy is negatively impacting Vermont's healthcare system. So that was pretty huge that we actually were able to strike that. And what they wanted, I think the point of this lesson though too is that what they wanted to happen is that all the people who wanted universal health care would be divided along, oh, we should fight this, or no, we just want the bill to pass, so we're going to let it slide and we're going to let it go through. That is the division that they wanted to see happen. And we got in front of that and we didn't let that happen, and that meant a lot.
For our first Healthcare is a Human Right rally a couple days later, we got word from a foundation that funded us said that they were asking us to take a position on whether or not women's reproductive rights would be included in our universal health care system, and that if we didn't take a position against women's reproductive rights, that they were going to pull our funding, which at the time was about a third of the funding for our organization. And we sat down, we actually brought lots of our members to meet with them and talk about, we're talking about the most basic right of health care, and we couldn't take that position, so we stood up to that. We lost the funding, and we actually made a major shift in our organization to be funded by people who are in this movement with us rather than by outside forces, and that the decisions about our campaign and what our health care system needs to look like needs to be based on our values and nothing else. And so we really made a shift and realized that we needed to be people funded, and so we made a huge push. We actually raised all of the money back from going out and talking to individuals and gathering grassroots fundraising support for our campaign. Lesson number 4, it's not about having convincing arguments, it's about getting our communities organized statewide to demand justice. So convincing arguments are good, and actually there have been a lot of convincing arguments around for a really long time. And in Vermont, I don't know about here, but for 25 years there have been a single payer bill in the legislature every year that never came off the wall, but there were a few really smart people, including some of the folks you saw in that video, talking about all the good reasons why we needed to have a single-payer healthcare system, and they made some very good points and showed some very important statistics and really about that. But we realized early on that having those convincing arguments was not enough, that we needed to actually be organized and have the people power to put the pressure on our legislators to actually make that change possible. And that was something that we learned and continued to relearn throughout the campaign. It wasn't just about what we said and what we thought, it was about what we did to show that power.
And then similarly, it wasn't just about convincing people, our communities with those convincing arguments. We actually needed to ask them to take action and get organized to do something. So another lesson that we learned that's really important is that we need to tell our own stories. And so what we mean by that is that the mainstream media and our politicians will literally go out of their way to exclude people's movements from, both people's struggles and people's movements from the story, that's the dominant story that's being told. So it's not that often that you ever turn on the news and you see the stories about your neighbors who are losing their homes because they don't have access to health care. You don't turn on the news and see stories about people who are staying in jobs that they hate or in abusive relationships because they're afraid to lose their health care, right? So we learned that we need to make our own media. Things like those videos that you saw, we have learned lots and lots of ways that we can get our own story out there. Not just get our story into the mainstream media, but make our own, because we need to have the voice to tell the stories of what's actually happening in our communities. And then in addition to that, we need to tell the stories of what we're doing about it. This is inspirational. When people come together and fight back against these systems that are keeping us unhealthy, that is something that can actually inspire people to do the same. And that's the reason that the mainstream media is not going to ever really tell those stories. So a lot of people don't even know what's been happening in Vermont and don't even know that it happened because of this grassroots people's movement. You know, a lot of the story that's been told on the national level is just about the governor, like he just woke up one day and decided that we should have a universal healthcare system. And like Kate told you, I mean, he was the exact same guy who told us that it sounds like a great idea, but it's not possible, it's not practical. So I wanted to just show you this picture. This is actually, you can't even see the extent of it. This is the day that the bill was signed, this bill that we've been fighting for years. And you can see some of the red shirts behind. Those are our Healthcare is a Human Right t-shirts. And basically the whole crowd was people in Healthcare is a Human Right t-shirts. So this is now a bunch of people in suits signing the bill. And they had a whole bunch of different speakers. And they explicitly did not mention, not even one time, the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign, which has been literally, you saw the pictures of us dominating every healthcare hearing, of us meeting with these legislators in their homes, and we were completely left out of the actual bill signing. And then what happened is we were actually completely left out. This picture for the newspaper was cropped so that there was not a single red shirt. They literally cropped us out of the picture. So it's really important that we learn that we cannot depend on them to tell our stories, and we can't just have these campaigns. We need to create our own media and storytelling infrastructure to get the word out.
So how did we do this? So there's basically three phases of the campaign, three aspects of the work. First, building our base statewide and coming to the launch of our healthcare of our big May 1st rally. So actually going out, we spent the whole first year of the campaign not even going to the legislature, but just building up our grassroots base. Second, beginning a values-based legislative campaign. And the second year of the campaign is really when we honed in and developed our human rights principles, came up with an assessment tool to figure out how does legislation actually meet human rights principles, how can we tell, what questions do we ask, and then having that grassroots network there that's actually able to actually put the pressure on the legislature to change it and make it actually meet those principles. And then in phase 3, actually passing legislation and staying organized to make sure that we follow through on those victories.
So we're gonna go through some of the key strategies and tactics that we have used throughout this campaign, and we're gonna get into them each in a little bit of detail. But overview, we've used mass organizing, we've used storytelling, we engage power holders on our own terms, we use education for leadership development and capacity building. We have something we call the People's Team and our policy committee, and we organize statewide. So we're going to get into the details.
So first, mass organizing. And so by mass organizing, we mean we always have some kind of tool in our pocket that we can use to engage people all the time. So for example, one of the first things that we did was a survey. And the surveys were to find out how the healthcare crisis was affecting Vermonters. You saw a little bit about that in the movie. But it was actually an organizing tool. It was actually a tool to have a conversation with someone. So we weren't just handing out surveys and asking people to fill them out, but we were sitting down and having that conversation with them, asking them those questions, and starting to build relationships with people. We did postcards, we did petitions, we had things like you could call your legislature, so we'd have like a phone tree, and people would whenever something was happening in the state house, like a bad amendment got introduced and we needed to call all the legislators that were on that committee, we had like phone trees set out to do that, and people could call and leave a message with the sergeant at arms who would deliver them in the committee room. And we had a photo petition, which I don't know if you can see, they're a little small, but these pictures of people holding the dry erase boards with the healthcare is a human right picture, and they'd write their name and their town, and we'd get these pictures printed out and actually deliver them to the legislature and use them in movies and stuff, and it really put a face to it. So I think the reason why we use these is three main reasons. One, it's always a reason to engage people. Anytime you're walking down the street, getting a cup of coffee, sitting in the doctor's office, you start chatting with someone, you've got a petition in your pocket that you can ask them to sign, and now they're participating in the campaign too. And which leads to number two, anyone can participate. So even the busiest person, even the person who never leaves their home can be a part of the campaign by doing these small tasks. And they're each, it's the basic principle of organizing. Alone we can't do a lot, but together there's a lot we can do. Every tiny small ask, if we have a lot of them, hundreds of them, thousands of them, add up to a big picture. So, and then three, it's a way for us to demonstrate our power to the legislators. So not only have we used these postcards that we're getting signed to demonstrate, as an organizing tool, as a conversation starter, as a way to engage people and have them participate in the campaign and begin to develop their leadership, but then we take them to the State House and deliver them and demonstrate thousands and thousands of people who are supporting changing this broken healthcare system.
So another really, really important tactic for us during this campaign and in all of our work is that we use storytelling. So we, and this means people telling their own stories about how this healthcare crisis is affecting them. And so that could mean really horrifying, terrible things, but it can also just mean some of the everyday ways that the healthcare system affects us, even if we do have good coverage, but we know that we're one job loss away. Every single person out there has a story about this healthcare system is working for very, very few people in reality. And so we ask everybody to figure out what their story is. And so we use them. People giving testimonies and hearings at the State House would always be testifying not just that they agree, but they would tell their stories of why and what this means to them. At meetings, we start meetings actually by everybody going around introducing themselves and talking about why they're there. What about this healthcare system drives them to get up every day and fight back and do something about what's happening. We write letters to the editor. We had a huge letters to the editor campaign with people getting their stories out into the newspapers. And it was an opportunity both for people to write their stories and articulate what they were going through, but also to get together to do that. So we would actually gather and have letter to the editor writing parties. And we would sit around and we would tell our stories to each other, and then we would go and turn them into letters and send them all to all the papers. Also, we have something called the Stories Project. I mentioned already that we need to learn to tell our own stories and make our own media. And so this was a really important aspect of the campaign. We had people going out there collecting testimonies from folks all over the state about what this healthcare system looked like. And like Kate said, that's both a way to show what's happening, but it's also an amazing organizing tool. Then anybody has a reason to go out and talk to their neighbor about what they're going through. And that's really important. So some of the reasons why this is so amazingly important to us is that it puts lived experiences at the center of the debate. So it takes it out of this idea that we need experts to tell us about the statistics, about why the healthcare system is costing us too much money, and all that stuff is important. But what really moves us and moves people is what we're going through. And the real reason that we need to change this healthcare system is because people that we love are suffering, and that's wrong. And we all know that we can't go on with people in our communities not being able to go to the doctor. And so it really prioritizes that lived experience, and it also makes us realize that we're the experts on why this healthcare system is broken. It also helps the people who are most affected, which is all of us, really lead the movement. So people who are used to not speaking up are actually becoming leaders because they have a story to tell. It asks people to better understand their own story. So it's not just I believe in this because it sounds more fair, but actually I believe in this because I have a story, and there's something that has happened to me or somebody I love, and that's part of what's bringing me here. So also, like I talked about, stories move people in a way that charts and graphs just can't. And then also, when our stories are in conflict with the dominant narrative, it really helps. We do have a lot of messaging. Somebody talked about socialized medicine. There's a lot of messaging coming at us about why this is a terrible idea and we can't do this. But when we learn to tell our own stories, we start to see the ways that our story is in conflict with that narrative about our healthcare system being the best in the world, about all of the things that make up that dominant narrative. When we learn to tell our own stories, that story really starts to fall apart. So I think that's another really important piece.
So the next one is engaging power holders on our own terms. Human rights hearings, you saw some of the footage of this in the movie, people's forums, and accountability meetings. So we would hold, it's become a tradition for us every fall, gearing up for the legislative session, we hold meetings where we will invite our legislators to come and listen to us. And it's totally different from any legislative debate you've ever been to. It's really actually kind of funny when you get the legislators get there and we sit them down on the panel and they've got their name tag, and then we tell them, okay, here's the agenda for the evening. You're going to listen to us for an hour.
Oh, I love that one.
And then we're going to ask you questions, and you're going to have 1 or 2 minutes to respond. And so they get a little freaked out because they're not used to not talking for that long. But it's actually, it can be really powerful. So this is another place where that storytelling comes into play, and we ask questions that really frame the debate in the way that we see it. So one example of the question that we asked legislators at these forums was, what barriers do you see we would lay out the goals of the campaign, and we would say, what barriers do you see to reaching these goals, and how are you going to help us overcome those obstacles? And so it's not an option that we're not going to do this, right? We are saying we're going to do this, we're going to make it happen. What are the obstacles and how are we going to get over them? And so really engaging them on our own terms. We did that in public forums and public hearings in the State House, and we also did that in the homes of our members. We would invite the legislators into their living rooms and have conversations among neighbors right there in their own homes on our terms. So it reframes the role of government. Our government is accountable to us. This is our society, and we get to decide what it looks like. We elect them to make laws that reflect our values, and so this is us holding them accountable to actually do that. We set the agenda and ask them to listen to our stories. So we tell those stories. Storytelling is in everything we do. We start out telling the stories so that later on when one of these legislators says, well, like, this all sounds great, but can we really afford it? We can come back to the question of, well, if we don't do something, if we don't make this happen, then these stories and these crises that are happening in our communities are going to keep happening until we do, and just keep being able to bring it back to that. And then we can ask them direct questions publicly and hold them accountable. So one of the things that we also did, another question that we asked them in these public hearings in the first round, was we actually said, yes or no, is healthcare a human right? And we got them on video saying yes. So, very few were gonna stand there and say no, healthcare is not a human right after hearing the stories that people had told, their personal stories, really vulnerable people speaking out about it. And so, they said yes, it's a human right, and then the conversation shifts to, okay, so how are we going to get there?
So another thing, and we started to mention this a little bit, is that we do a lot of education for leadership development. It's not just about mobilizing people and getting them to the rally or getting them to make calls, but we are always developing each other as leaders of this movement. And so we mentioned the anti-racism workshops that we've done all across the state with our members. We have a 3-day intensive organizing and strategic thinking and analysis a workshop called Solidarity School. We do shorter organizing workshops with all of our members around the state, and we do media workshops where we are learning both how to break down some of those lessons about the ways that the media doesn't tell our stories, and how to make media ourselves in very simple ways. And so we do this because we need to have common analysis and understanding of the way this healthcare system is part of a bigger system, right? So like we talked about at the beginning, we know that healthcare is connected to housing and to education and to all of these other things that our communities are dealing with, and we need to be on the same page about really understanding what's actually going on in our healthcare system so that we're ready when those tactics are used against us. It also connects people's personal experiences to the root causes of that system. So we're not just talking about about why the healthcare system is broken, but we're talking about why people don't have a say in the decisions that affect our everyday lives. And that we're able to then connect people and hook them for life into the struggle for justice. And that is really important, that we're really understanding that this is a much broader system that we're working within. And also, we have a ton of work to do, and we need to build capacity to do that work. So we have a very small staff at the Workers Center, and our leaders carry out the work of the organization in their own communities on a statewide level. And so we need to get together to build those skills, to build the media skills, to build the policy analysis, and to build the organizing capacity. You know, we can't organize a whole state with just 2 or 3 organizers doing the work. You know, we need every single member of the Workers Center and of this campaign to be trained as an organizer so that they can go out there and have those conversations with their family, with their neighbors, with their coworkers, and bring people in. And that's not necessarily just natural or easy for everybody. You know, we need to recognize that those are skills that need to be built. And so we prioritize spending the time to do that.
And finally, the People's Team and the Policy Committee is a big part of our work. We, as I said, for the first year of the campaign, we didn't even touch the legislative session at all. We were just building a grassroots base. But then when it came time to engage with the legislative session, we needed a way to do that. And our answer to the corporate-funded lobbyists and suits swarming the State House was our People's Team, which is a team of members of the Vermont Workers Center wearing red healthcare is a human right t-shirts, coming to the State House every day, sitting in every committee meeting in that room, just paying attention to what was going on, and also meeting with our legislators in the State House. And this was really powerful. We actually heard from some of our allies in the legislature how different the conversation was when we were in the room versus when we weren't in the room. Really, and it definitely made a difference. But not only that, it changed the conversation in the room, but then that People's Team could report back to our local organizing committees all over the state and let us know what was going on in the State House that day. So that evening we could get on the phone and call our legislators in our home districts and set up meetings with them if we needed to, write letters to the editor, and really engage in that process publicly as well. So why? Accountability in the State House every day, that physical presence reminds our power holders who we are and that we're organized. 2, it shows that people power can go up against their money. They have all the money, they do not have all the power. We can stand up against them if we're organized and if we're there. Policy framework is rooted in the local organizing committees and the work. Those people in the People's Team in the State House come from the local organizing committees and they go back to them, and that work is rooted in our local communities all over the state in every county. And it builds the capacity to respond to and win policy fights, as I was just talking about.
The last thing that's really important is that we organize on a statewide level. And this is something that's been really hard to figure out, but that we are really learning how to do well. And so we have local organizing committees, as we've mentioned many times, in every part of the state. And those local organizing committees are coordinated on a statewide basis. So we have, I think why this is really important is that we balance the work of the organizing committee and of our members so that they're always doing work locally. There's always a presence of the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign in their community and in their county where they live, and there's always a way for people to participate in a meeting, in an event, in a movie showing, in something that's happening right there in their own community, but that is also always a part of a statewide campaign, and we're always bringing to the forefront that what's happening tonight, with our local organizing committee is the same meeting is happening right now, in the northeastern part of the state and in Bennington and in Brattleboro, and we talk about that a lot, and then we bring people together to see that the work that they're doing locally is also happening in other parts of the state. So we use this thing called Vermont Interactive Television, which now we can do just over Skype even, or something like that, where we bring people together from all across the state over a video conference. And it's a tough way to actually get work done, but we do get to see each other and know that we're part of this statewide movement, and that has been really important. And then we actually do come together on lobby days at the State House or at our membership assembly, and we actually bring everyone together at certain points during the year to really be a statewide organization together. And so it's really important because it does localize the work and build community right where you live. You know, a lot of times I think when people try to plan statewide or national campaigns, it's like there are people doing the work locally, you know, but they're doing all the work for the day that they're in Washington, D.C. or something, or for the day that we're going to have one big rally in one other place. But the work has to also exist in your local community, I think. And then it also builds relationships across divides. So I've heard that this happens in Oregon too. There's a divide between rural communities and Burlington. You know, they say that people in Burlington are so lucky they get to live right next to Vermont. You know, but you know, so people really do. It's not a joke that that's a divide. You know, that people feel like Burlington is a different world or something. And so by building on a statewide level, we get past some of that stuff. You know, people think that the Northeast Kingdom is like worlds apart from Southern Vermont, and people are struggling with the same healthcare problems in all of those places. So by having this statewide organization, we're able to actually move past that stuff. And then also, it means that we can respond to, we can actually win policy because we can put pressure on all legislators all across the state. So those legislators, when they all go home for their break from the legislative session, they're all meeting with people in their local communities and they're hearing the exact same thing, right? So they're hearing stories and they're hearing the exact same 5 human rights principles that we're fighting for. So when they get back to the State House, it's not, oh, well, I've got this idea and I've got that idea. They've all heard the same things from their constituents, and that is really powerful. It also means that when one legislator is being a pain in the butt, we can put pressure on them, and we can't let one legislator, you know, ruin everything that we've been working for because we just don't have anybody in that part of the state. You know, we recognize that we need to build everywhere.
So what's next? We have a big fight ahead of us. We've won a lot and we've learned a lot of lessons, but we have a struggle ahead. The next phase of figuring out our healthcare system is going to be making sure that the financing is equitable. I mentioned these listening sessions that are going on in Vermont right now as we speak. Those are to figure out how our healthcare system is going to be financed and make sure it's not on the backs of the people who can't afford it, but that we're really looking at financing it equitably and making sure that people pay according to their ability to pay. Making sure that universal continues to mean everyone. We talked about this amendment that we were able to really fight off this past legislative session, and to be honest, I really don't think that battle is over. I think it's coming back year after year after year. I think that this issue of immigration and immigration status has been one of the most successful divide and conquer strategies that we've seen in other issues and other campaigns, and that we are really committed to making sure that that is not the case for the Healthcare as a Human Right campaign. And so we have our work cut out for us to really continue building around that and making sure that universal really does equal everyone. And it's not just about immigration. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are going to be divisive. You know, one of the things that we've been hearing a lot is like dividing people who are in unions to people who are not in unions, because people in unions have fought really hard for the healthcare coverage that they have, and they shouldn't have to be part of this universal healthcare system. So can we carve them out of it, or veterans, or, you know, all these different things? And so we really have to fight to make sure that everybody has equal access to the same healthcare system and that we're not divided. And then in addition to universal being everyone, universal coverage also means everybody gets the care they need when they need it. That it's not just a universal healthcare system with a really weak benefits package, but it's actually universal in covering all the care that people need at the time that they need it. And we are going to continue to face mounting opposition. We know that we're not done, and our opposition knows that they're not done either. This is just after the health care bill was passed. They, from the Vermont Insurance Agents Association, they say it's a far cry from being implemented. We will not be pushovers. So they are just starting to ramp up, and we've seen organizations like Vermonters for Healthcare Freedom pop up, and well-funded AstroTurf, we call them, because it's not really grassroots, right? Like, it's just like sort of a front organization. And actually, one of our biggest opposition, the Insurance Agents Association, during the legislative session, while we were coordinating our grassroots campaign to make calls to our legislators at key votes in the legislature, the Insurance Agents Association had all of their agents in the state calling their clients, asking them to call their legislators too. So they were mobilizing as well. And then we actually have launched our Put People First campaign. Put People First has always been at the center of our healthcare campaign as well, and we've actually started a campaign for a people's budget. The next phase of our healthcare fight is going to be about budgeting. It is going to be about the finance, and we realize that that is an issue that can't be taken, fought in isolation. That it comes back to the whole divide and conquer. We will be pitted against other essential public services that people need to live healthy lives, and we can't let that happen. So we're really getting in front of that issue and saying we need a state budget that meets human rights principles overall, and our healthcare system is a part of that. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be, that we're just starting to launch our People's Budget campaign as we continue to fight for equitable financing in our healthcare system and continuing to get organized. I mean, I think one of the biggest victories of this campaign is not just that we won a universal healthcare bill, but we built an organization of Vermonters that is now organized and are developed and educated and skilled leaders that are able to take on whatever issues face our communities. And we've seen a huge success. Just this past August, Vermont was hit really hard by Hurricane Irene, and many of our communities were devastated. And then we saw that there was no help until they got organized and joined the Workers Center and stood up, and we actually fought to actually get the kind of help and support that people needed. And we could talk forever about that struggle too, but it's the kind of organizing lessons that we've learned that now apply to whatever situations face our communities, and that will carry with us as we continue to build this social movement.
Red shirts have been a really important and awesome part of our campaign, and have really identified us. And I think I don't know to what extent we sort of
Red's just always been the color for our organization.
for the Worker Center, so that's pretty much it. But
whatever color you choose, I think the important part is having
unity.
Unity is that showing that visible unity. And actually, there's a lot of people wearing red in this room. All studies have shown that hardly anybody will be paying more than they will now, because there's so much waste and so much profit in our healthcare system that would be taken out. But we do want to make sure that it's paid for equitably, so it's not disproportionate, and that employers that can afford to put more of their resources into the healthcare system do, and that it's paid for based on people's ability to pay. So, but certainly a lot of that burden, a lot of times right now, people don't get raises because their employers putting more and more money every year into their healthcare system, and we'd like to see that change. We stood up to the insurance companies with grassroots people power. Our legislators, at the end of the day, they need to get elected. And I think sometimes they feel like the best way to get elected is to please the big power brokers and the companies in the insurance industry, and that's certainly what a lot of them have felt like on the federal level at this point. And so what we really did was we just shifted that balance of power and made them see that the best way to get elected and to serve us was to do the will of the people and create a healthcare system that treated healthcare as a human right.
And that just requires consistent engagement. I mean, that required a lot of consistent engagement. It's not just one rally to show that there's a lot of people who agree. It means all the time engaging with them and holding them accountable and reminding them that they are there to serve their constituents, and that they can actually step up and do the right thing, and that we're behind them. So it wasn't like, you're so bad, why are you not doing the right thing? It was this is what we want you to do, and we're going to stand behind you all the way.
Mm-hmm. And still continuing to say that you have been courageous, you have led the country, and we are here behind you, so please do not back down. And just, it's a mix of like pressure and thank you, and pressure and thank you when they do the right thing. We praise them when they do the right thing, and then we give them hell when they do the wrong thing.
Exactly.
Not everybody is just out there acting because of self-interest, and that most people, even if they have good health insurance, know somebody that doesn't, and know somebody that's really struggled with the healthcare system. And that I think one of the things that we've really seen is that people, the idea of healthcare being a human right, and the sense of this current healthcare system being a real injustice in our society, really, I think, resonates with a lot of people, that this is not the world that we envision for ourselves and our children and our future. future. This is not, whether I'm in an okay situation now or not, this is just not what should be happening in this world. And really, I think that's where the storytelling can come in really useful too.
And I think we're in an amazing opportunity where actually we have a new frame. This 99% versus the 1% is, in the way we see it, right on. The 99% does not have health care. And and the fact that now every time I knock on somebody's door, they already have that framing of this 99% idea is huge. It makes our job a lot easier that now in our national consciousness, people understand that divide and that wealth divide. And so we definitely have, a lot of our members have been a part of the occupations in Vermont or have gone to New York and whatnot, but whether people have or not, I think it's important for us to be engaging and building with people as much as possible if we've got the same goals. And we've got a lot of, organizations are different than spontaneous movements for sure, but we're trying to figure out, we have a lot to learn and a lot that we can teach about having an organization, and so we're trying to work with each other in that way.